My name is Ella, and I don't remember exactly when I first realized I was different from my sister Sarah. Maybe it was when I was 7, and she was 4, watching her play with dolls while I helped Mom with dinner. Or perhaps it was during all those afternoons when I'd peek through our kitchen window, watching other kids playing outside while I scrubbed dishes that were almost too high for me to reach. "Ella, homework done?" Mom would ask every day after school, her voice sharp with expectation. "Yes, Mom," I'd reply, already tying on the 2 big aprons she'd bought me for my 6th birthday. A practical gift, she'd called it. "Good. Now help me with dinner." "Sarah, honey, you can go play." Sarah would skip off, her dark pigtails bouncing, while I'd stand on my tiptoes to reach the counter. Even at 7, I knew better than to complain. "She's still little," Mom would say whenever I tried. "You're the big sister. You need to help out." Dad wasn't any different. He'd come home from work, ruffle Sarah's hair as she showed him her latest drawing, usually done during homework time, then turn to me with that look I knew too well. "How were your grades today, Ella?" Not, "How was your day?" or "What did you learn?" Just grades, always grades. "All A's, Dad," I'd say, and he'd nod like that was the minimum he expected. Because it was. Our house wasn't big, a modest 2-story in a middle class. My friends lived nearby, but I rarely saw them outside of school. There was always something that needed doing: dishes, laundry, helping Sarah with her homework, even though she rarely paid attention, or studying to maintain those perfect grades. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 10. I'd just won first place in the regional math competition, and my parents were beaming as my teacher praised me. "You've done such an amazing job raising Ella," Mrs. Peterson said. "Her love for learning is extraordinary." Mom and Dad exchanged proud looks. "Well, we've always encouraged her to read," Mom said, her hand on my shoulder. "Haven't we, Ella?" I wanted to tell Mrs. Peterson the truth, that I'd stayed up late studying by flashlight because daytime was for chores. That the only encouragement I got was the threat of disappointment if I brought home anything less than perfect. But I just smiled and nodded, like the good daughter I was supposed to be. Meanwhile, Sarah was making paper airplanes out of her failed math test in the hallway, and nobody said a word about it. That's how it always was in our house. Sometimes I'd catch Sarah watching me with a smirk, especially when she'd get away with something that would have earned me a lecture. "You're just jealous," she told me once, when I was 12 and she was 9. "Because Mom and Dad like me better." I remember standing there in our shared bathroom, my hands still wet from cleaning it, looking at her reflection in the mirror I'd just wiped streak-free. "That's not true," I said, but even then, a part of me wondered if it was. By the time Sarah started middle school, I was basically her personal tutor, not by choice, but by parental decree. Every afternoon, I'd sit with her at the kitchen table, trying to explain basic algebra while she texted under the table. "Sarah, you need to pay attention," I'd say, exhausted after my own school day and chores. "Why? You'll just end up doing it for me anyway," she'd reply with that irritating smirk of hers. And she was right, that's exactly what would happen. "Ella, why isn't Sarah's homework done yet?" Mom would inevitably ask, hands on her hips. "She's not focusing." "Then make her focus. You're supposed to be helping her." So I'd end up doing Sarah's homework while she watched YouTube videos, because it was easier than dealing with Mom's disappointment. Meanwhile, Sarah's weekly allowance would appear like clockwork, $20 every Friday. Me? I was lucky if I got $5 a month, usually with a lecture about how money doesn't grow on trees. The breaking point came when I turned 16. I was tired of watching Sarah flaunt her new clothes and latest gadgets while I wore hand-me-downs and couldn't even buy lunch at school. That's when I saw the Help Wanted sign at Joe's Cafe, just 3 blocks from our house. Joe, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd served me countless hot chocolates over the years, hired me on the spot. The work was hard, waiting tables, cleaning up spills, dealing with grumpy customers, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was earning my own money. That first paycheck felt like freedom in my hands, $850 for a month of part-time work. I should have known better than to leave it on my desk. Ella, Mom's voice rang through the house that evening. Come down here right now. They were both waiting in the kitchen, my paycheck on the table between them. Dad looked stern, Mom disappointed, expressions I knew all too well. Why didn't you tell us you were making this much? Dad demanded. I just got paid, I stammered. Well, since you're living in our house and eating our food, you'll be giving us half of this, Mom declared. It's only fair. The worst part wasn't even giving up half my paycheck. It was what happened next. A week later, Sarah waltzed into our room wearing brand new Nike sneakers. Look what Mom and Dad bought me with your money, she sang, twirling around. Guess all that waitressing is good for something after all. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried that night, but it was also when I made my decision. I was getting out of here, and college was my ticket to freedom. My parents would never pay for it, they made that clear every time they talked about how Sarah would need money for college someday. So I threw myself into my studies with renewed determination. I started staying late at school to use the library computers, researching scholarships and free tuition programs. Every spare moment was spent studying for the SATs, writing essays, and maintaining my perfect GPA. Graduation day was exactly what I expected it to be, another performance of The Perfect Family, starring my parents. I sat through the ceremony in my blue cap and gown, watching them beam from the audience as Principal Roberts called me up as valedictorian. The Matthews have done an extraordinary job raising Ella, he announced to the crowd. Her academic achievements are truly remarkable. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while Dad stood tall, his chest puffed out with pride. I could see them soaking up the praise like they always did, nodding and smiling as other parents congratulated them on their wonderful parenting. What none of them knew was that I'd already received acceptance letters from every college I'd applied to. I'd been checking the mailbox religiously for weeks, intercepting the letters before anyone else could see them. Each congratulations felt like a key to a door I'd been trying to unlock my whole life. But the best one, the one I'd chosen, was from Riverside State University. Full scholarship, free dormitory housing, and a stipend. It was 4 hours away, in the next state over. Far enough that I couldn't come home on weekends to help out. I hadn't told them yet. I was waiting for the right moment, which came sooner than I expected at our graduation dinner. Mom had made my favorite pasta, or what she thought was my favorite, she'd never actually asked, and we were all sitting around the dining room table. So, Ella, Mom said, serving herself another helping, have you thought about what you're going to do now? I opened my mouth to tell them about Riverside, but before I could get a word out, Mom continued with a bright smile. I was talking to Joe at the cafe yesterday. He said he'd be happy to take you on full time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could earn so much more, and really help out with the family expenses. I took a deep breath. I got accepted to college. Full scholarship at Riverside State. I'm starting in the fall. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. College? Mom's voice was sharp. In another state? But what about your family? What about helping your sister? I've been helping my sister my entire life, I said quietly. This is something I need to do for myself. Dad stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. Without a word, he walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Now look what you've done, Mom hissed. Sarah just sat there with a slight smirk, probably already calculating how to get my room when I left. That last summer at home was like living with ghosts. I'd go to work at the cafe, come home, hand over half my paycheck, and retreat to my room. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, just cold, necessary exchanges about bills or dinner times. The money they took from my paychecks, they accepted without a word of thanks. When August came, I packed my bags alone. No tearful goodbyes, no family photos on the front porch, no Dad loading up the car like I saw other students had. Just me, my 2 suitcases, and a bus ticket to Riverside State. I'm leaving now, I announced that morning, standing in the kitchen doorway. Mom kept washing dishes, her back to me. Dad rustled his newspaper. Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. Okay, Mom said, like I'd told her I was going to the grocery store. The bus ride to college was 4 hours of pure relief. With each mile, I felt lighter, freer. My dorm room was small but clean, and my roommate Jenny became the sister I'd always wished I had, supportive, kind, interested in my life. I threw myself into my finance classes, loving every minute of learning about investment strategies and market analysis. My professors praised my work ethic, and for once, there was no one around to take credit for it. The rare calls home always followed the same pattern. Sarah's thinking about becoming a model, Mom would say, not asking how I was doing. She's just waiting for the right opportunity, Dad would add, ignoring my attempts to share my own achievements. In my junior year, Sarah graduated high school. Mom called specifically to tell me about it, though not because they wanted me at the ceremony. Sarah's taking some time to figure things out, Mom explained. Her grades weren't quite college material, but we told her not to worry about it. The right job will come along. I thought about how they'd pushed me to work at 16, how they'd taken half my earnings, how they'd fought my college dreams. What's she doing in the meantime? I asked. Oh, just exploring her options, Mom said breezily. We don't want her to rush into anything she's not passionate about. I graduated with honors, my name at the top of the dean's list. Jenny's family cheered for me at graduation since mine didn't come. 2 weeks later, I was back in my hometown, starting as a junior financial analyst at Reynolds & Associates. My starting salary was more than my parents made combined. The first time I could afford my own apartment, I felt like I could finally breathe. But as soon as word got around about my job, the dinner invitations started. You must be doing well for yourself, Dad would say, eyeing my professional clothes. We're so proud, Mom would add, before launching into another story about Sarah's latest job interview or modeling prospect. Sarah would sit across from me at these dinners, still glued to her phone, still looking for the right opportunity at 19. She hadn't worked a day in her life, but somehow that was fine. I was the one they looked to with expectant eyes, dropping hints about bills and home repairs. The property taxes have gone up so much, Mom would sigh. It's hard to make ends meet these days, Dad would add. So I started giving them money, $500 here, $1,000 there. But their hints kept coming, their expectations growing with each deposit I made. The more I gave, the more they seemed to expect, like I was making up for the crime of leaving, of building my own life. The day I got promoted to senior financial analyst, I made the mistake of mentioning it to Mom during our weekly call. Within hours, she'd planned a celebration dinner at their house. We're so proud of you, honey, Mom said, but her voice had that particular tone I knew too well. It's wonderful that you're doing so well. Especially since things have been so difficult here. Right on cue, Dad sighed heavily. The company's making cuts again. They've reduced my hours. And these bills, Mom added, pulling a crumpled paper from her pocket. Her eyes were already welling up with tears. I just don't know how we're going to manage the utilities this month. I glanced at Sarah, still absorbed in her phone, wearing designer jeans that I knew Mom and Dad couldn't afford. I wanted to point out that a 22-year-old capable of spending hours making dance videos could probably handle a job application or two. The words were right there on my tongue, but I swallowed them back. Then Mom dropped the bomb. You know, Ella, she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, we've been thinking. You're spending so much on that apartment of yours. Why don't you move back home? You could save money, and we could help each other out. I felt like I was 16 again, watching my hard-earned money disappear into their pockets. The thought of giving up my peaceful apartment, my independence, my space, it made my stomach churn. But as I opened my mouth to refuse, I saw the familiar guilt-inducing looks on their faces. Okay, I heard myself say, and watched their faces light up with joy. A week later, I was back in my childhood bedroom. The room felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown too big for it. I laid down my conditions quickly. I'll help with the bills and groceries, but I won't be cooking or cleaning. I did enough of that growing up. Mom agreed immediately, too quickly, really. It wasn't until I heard Sarah's outraged shriek the next day that I understood why. "What do you mean I have to clean?" she wailed. "I don't even know how to use the vacuum cleaner." "Well, it's time you learned," Mom said, in a tone far gentler than she'd ever used with me about chores. "Ella's helping us financially, so you can help with the house." I watched from my doorway as Sarah stomped around with the vacuum, barely touching the carpet, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. She'd post passive-aggressive stories on Instagram later about forced labor and unfair treatment, but I couldn't bring myself to care. After all, she was still living off my money, my grocery payments, my utility contributions, my rent equivalent that mysteriously never seemed to reduce our parents' financial strain. The least she could do was learn how to clean a bathroom. "Ella, have you noticed how shabby the house is looking?" Mom mentioned casually one morning over coffee. "The paint is peeling, and that wallpaper in the living room." Dad joined in immediately. "The bathroom fixtures are pretty outdated too. Sure would be nice to give this place a facelift." I knew what was coming. 3 days and several hints later, they finally asked outright if I would help with some home improvements. By help, of course, they meant pay for everything. I ended up spending nearly $30,000 on repairs and renovations. New paint throughout the house, updated bathroom fixtures, modern kitchen appliances, hardwood flooring to replace the old carpet, and fresh wallpaper in every room. I even had the exterior painted and the garden landscaped. The transformation was remarkable, I had to admit. The house looked like something out of a home improvement magazine. And suddenly, our house became the social hub of the family. "You must come see what we've done with the place," Mom would say on the phone to relatives and friends. "We've made such wonderful improvements." Always we. I'd sit quietly during these gatherings, watching Mom and Dad beam with pride as guests praised their beautiful home and excellent taste. Not once did they mention that I'd funded the entire renovation. Not once did they acknowledge that their improved lifestyle came from my bank account. As Christmas approached, they planned their biggest gathering yet. Mom invited every relative within driving distance, plus all their friends. "It'll be perfect," she kept saying. "Everyone will see how well we're doing." I spent a fortune on gifts for everyone, including a new laptop for Sarah that she'd been hinting about for months. Christmas Day arrived, and the house was packed with people admiring the renovations and enjoying the catered food, which I'd also paid for. When it came time to exchange gifts, I watched as Sarah unwrapped a brand new iPhone from our parents, complete with all the accessories. Her squeal of delight could probably be heard next door. My gift from them? A bath set from the drugstore, the kind you buy last minute when you've forgotten someone. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and thanked them, then watched as everyone opened the expensive gifts I'd bought them. Nobody seemed to notice the disparity. Nobody seemed to care. The party was winding down when Mom cleared her throat to make an announcement. "Linda and her kids are staying with us for a few days," she said, gesturing to her friend from out of state. Linda smiled warmly, her 2 teenage children looking tired after the long drive. "That's nice," I said, already thinking about how cramped the living room would be with 3 people sleeping there. But Mom wasn't finished. "Ella, you'll need to clear your things out of your room. Linda and the kids will be staying there." I stood there in the middle of the living room, still processing what I'd just heard. Linda and her kids shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. "They can stay in the living room," I suggested, trying to keep my voice level. "We can set up the pull-out couch and bring in the air mattress." "Don't be ridiculous," Mom snapped. "They're guests. We can't make them sleep in the living room, they'll be uncomfortable there." The irony of her concern for their comfort hit me like a slap. "And what about my comfort?" I asked, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "Did you think about that at all?" Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Stop making a scene. Just pack your things and move to the living room. It's only for a few days." I looked around at the house I'd renovated, at the Christmas decorations I'd paid for, at the presents I'd bought. Something inside me snapped. Why can't they stay in Sarah's room? The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's head snapped up from her new iPhone, her mouth hanging open. Mom and Dad looked at each other like I'd suggested setting the house on fire. I can't believe you'd even suggest that, Sarah sputtered. That's completely out of the question, Mom said firmly. Why? I pressed. Why is it okay to displace me but not her? Mom's face turned red. You're embarrassing me in front of my friend, she hissed. This is not how we raised you to behave. If you can't show proper respect in this house, Dad thundered, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. Get out, Mom added, her voice shrill. Get out until you learn some manners. I looked at them, really looked at them. At Mom's self-righteous anger, at Dad's red face, at Sarah's smug little smile. Not one of them seemed to remember or care that I was the one who'd paid for the roof over their heads, the food on their table, the presents under their tree. I didn't remind them. Instead, I walked upstairs to my room, the room they wanted to give away, like it was theirs to give. My hands were steady as I packed my suitcase, as I made calls to find a hotel or hostel that had vacancies on Christmas night. The Paradise Inn, a small hostel on the edge of town, had one room left. I booked it immediately. 20 minutes later, I walked down those beautiful hardwood stairs I'd paid for, carrying my suitcase. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a word. Sarah just smirked and went back to playing with her new iPhone. The Paradise Inn wasn't much, a small room with a lumpy bed and a bathroom down the hall, but it felt more like home than my parents' house had in years. I spent New Year's Eve there, alone with Chinese takeout and my laptop, searching for apartments. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a modern complex across town, far from my parents' neighborhood. My phone buzzed constantly those first few days, texts and calls from my parents and Sarah. I didn't read or answer any of them. I bought furniture I actually liked, not just what my parents would approve of. Painted the walls colors I chose. Created a space that was entirely mine. 2 weeks after I moved in, Mom finally caught me off guard. I answered my phone without checking the caller ID, a mistake I wouldn't make again. The utility bills are due, she said without preamble, her voice sharp and demanding. Linda and her kids are gone now, so you can come back. Your room is waiting. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. No hello, no apology, just another demand. No, I said quietly. What do you mean, no? She sounded genuinely confused, as if the possibility of my refusal had never occurred to her. I mean no, Mom. I'm not coming back. And I'm not paying your bills anymore. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the explosion I'd been expecting. How dare you, she screeched. After everything we've done for you? This is how you repay us? By abandoning your family when we need you? I let her rant for a moment, listening to the familiar guilt trips and accusations. They didn't touch me anymore. You made it very clear how you really feel about me, I said when she paused for breath. You've shown me that I'm nothing more than a checkbook to you. Well, that checkbook is closed now. Don't call me again unless you're ready to treat me with respect. I hung up before she could respond. The calls and texts intensified after that. Dad left voicemails about family duty. Sarah sent manipulative messages about how she was suffering because of my selfishness. Mom alternated between rage and tearful guilt trips. I blocked them all. Weeks passed, then months. I threw myself into my work, got another promotion. Started taking yoga classes. Through mutual friends, I heard about what was happening at my parents' house. They were struggling to pay bills for the first time in years. Sarah had been forced to take a job as a cashier at the local supermarket, the kind of unglamorous work she'd always looked down on. She was apparently terrible at it, constantly calling in sick and complaining about having to stand all day. Mom and Dad were telling anyone who would listen about their ungrateful eldest daughter who had abandoned them in their time of need. They'd spin elaborate tales about all they'd sacrificed for my education, none, how they'd supported my career, they hadn't, and how I'd betrayed them as soon as I found success. Some people believed them. Let them. The truth was, I'd spent 25 years being the person they wanted me to be, the dutiful daughter, the responsible one, the family ATM. Now it was time to be myself. The funny thing is, I'm actually grateful to them now, not for the years of manipulation and control, but for that last Christmas night when they pushed too far. Sometimes you need to lose everything to find yourself. I was 12 when my world turned upside down. That morning started like any other. Dad kissed me goodbye before heading to work at the construction company where he was a site manager. Mom barely looked up from her phone as he left. I remember thinking how strange it was that they used to be so different with each other. My name is Melanie Carter, and that was the last time I saw my father alive. He collapsed at work that afternoon, a massive heart attack, they said. I was in math class when the principal called me to her office. Mom was already there, her mascara perfectly intact despite the news she'd just received. "Your father's gone, Melanie," she said, her voice steady. Too steady. I broke down crying, but Mom just sat there, patting my back mechanically. That evening, I overheard her on the phone with her friend Linda. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Mom's voice carried through the thin walls of our suburban home. "Actually, Linda, this might be for the best," she said, her voice low but clear. "Being a widow is much more respectable than being divorced. Plus, I get to keep everything without the hassle of lawyers." She laughed, actually laughed. I know. I'll play the grieving widow at the funeral. I've already picked out the perfect black dress." I sat on the stairs, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from screaming. Dad's sister, Aunt Sarah, was the only one who seemed to see through Mom's act at the funeral. While everyone else was offering condolences to my devastated mother, Aunt Sarah just stood there, shaking her head sadly. She knew. She'd always known how Mom treated Dad. It didn't take Mom long to heal from her loss. Within 3 months, she started having a man over for dinner. His name was Richard Thompson, and he had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brandon, who was 11, and Emma, who was 10. Mom would cook elaborate meals when they visited, something she'd never done for Dad. "Melanie, honey," Mom said one evening, her voice syrupy sweet. "Richard and I have something to tell you." I knew what was coming. The way they sat together on the couch, holding hands, Mom beaming like a teenager, it was obvious. "We're getting married," Mom announced. "Isn't it wonderful? You'll have a new father and siblings." I forced a smile, but inside, my stomach was turning. "That's great, Mom. Congratulations." Richard smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Brandon and Emma are so excited to have a new sister," he said, but I'd seen how his kids looked at me during their visits, like I was something stuck to the bottom of their expensive sneakers. That night, I called Aunt Sarah and cried for hours. She listened patiently, then said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes, sweetie, the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Remember that." Brandon and Emma moved in the week after the honeymoon. They immediately claimed the best rooms in the house, including my playroom, which became Emma's art studio. When I tried to protest, Mom just said, "Don't be selfish, Melanie. We need to make them feel welcome." Mom transformed into a completely different person after marrying Richard. She'd spend hours helping Emma with her homework or watching Brandon's soccer practice, while I ate dinner alone in my room. The way she looked at Richard, it was like he hung the moon and stars just for her. I'd never seen her look at Dad that way. "Brandon needs new cleats for soccer," she'd say, or "Emma's taking art classes this summer." There was always money for what they needed. Meanwhile, I learned to stop asking for anything. Even basic things like new school supplies came with size and eye rolls, as if I was being unreasonable for needing pencils. They started taking trips together, nothing fancy, just weekend getaways to nearby cities or camping trips to state parks. But I was never invited. "You'll just be bored," Mom would say, not even looking at me as she packed snacks for Brandon and Emma. Besides, someone needs to feed the cat. I'd end up at Aunt Sarah's house during these trips. Her small cottage became more of a home to me than our house ever was. She never had kids of her own, but she treated me like the daughter she never had. "This isn't right, Melanie," she'd say, watching me unpack my overnight bag for what felt like the 100th time. "A mother shouldn't play favorites like this." I shrugged, trying to act like it didn't hurt. "At least I have you, Aunt Sarah." One evening, when I was 16, I decided to bring up college during dinner. I'd been researching schools, dreaming about studying business management. "Mom," I said, carefully choosing my moment when everyone was in a good mood. I wanted to talk about college applications. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. "College? Melanie, we can't afford to send you to college. We need to think about Brandon and Emma's education." Brandon smirked across the table, and Emma didn't even try to hide her satisfied grin. Richard just kept eating, as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen. "What about Dad's money?" I asked. "He had life insurance, and he'd been saving for years." Mom's face hardened. "I've spent that money taking care of you for the past 4 years," she snapped. "Food, clothes, shelter, did you think all that was free? Stop being so arrogant, Melanie. You can't just demand things from me." I stood there, stunned by her cold tone and the obvious lie in her words. Dad had worked hard to save for my future, and now it was all gone, spent on her new perfect family, while I watched from the sidelines. The next weekend, I went to Aunt Sarah's house, with tears still burning in my eyes. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, as I told her everything about Mom's cruel dismissal of my college dreams. Aunt Sarah listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When I finished, she got up without a word and disappeared into her study. I heard drawers opening and closing, then she returned with a thick envelope. "Your father came to see me about 2 weeks before he died," she said, sliding the envelope across the table. "It was strange, he seemed worried, almost like he knew something was going to happen. He gave me this and made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready for college." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement showing a substantial savings account in my name, with Aunt Sarah as the trustee. Dad had been secretly putting money aside for years. "He said your mother had been acting different," Aunt Sarah explained, her voice soft. "He wanted to make sure your future was secure, no matter what happened. The money's been gathering interest all these years." I burst into tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude and love for my father, who'd protected me even after he was gone. "We can't tell Mom about this," I said, wiping my eyes. Aunt Sarah nodded in agreement. Over the next 2 years, I focused on my studies while keeping quiet about my college plans. Brandon and Emma took every opportunity to remind me of my supposed future. "Hey, Melanie," Brandon would sneer in the hallway, "I heard the diner downtown needs a dishwasher. Better get your application in early." Emma would join in, "Maybe if you're lucky, they'll let you bus tables too." They'd laugh like it was the funniest joke in the world. I just walked past them, my silence driving them crazy. Then came graduation day. I'd barely taken off my cap and gown when Mom and Richard called me into the living room for a serious discussion. They sat on the couch like judges about to pass sentence, while I stood before them. "Melanie," Richard began, his voice stern, "you're 18 now. We've been generous, but you need to understand that you can't live here forever. You need to find a job and start earning your own living." I smiled calmly. "I understand completely. I'll be moved out by next week." They exchanged surprised looks. Clearly, they'd expected resistance or tears. Mom opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. "Well, good," Richard finally managed. "That's very mature of you." Neither of them asked where I planned to go or how I would support myself. They were too relieved that I'd agreed so easily to risk asking questions that might complicate things. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases, It was surprising how little I'd accumulated over the years, almost like I'd been subconsciously preparing for this moment all along. Aunt Sarah pulled up in her blue Honda at exactly 9 in the morning. I watched through my bedroom window as she parked, half expecting Mom or someone else to come see what was happening. But the house remained silent, even though I could see movement behind the curtains of Emma's room. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared completely. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt lighter with each mile we put between us and that house of carefully crafted pretenses. I spent that summer working at the Sunshine Cafe, serving coffee and sandwiches to regulars who always tipped well and treated me like family. The owner, Mrs. Peterson, even let me pick up extra shifts when I wanted to save more for college expenses. September came, and I boarded a plane to start my new life at Marshall State University, 3 states away from everything I'd known. The business management program was challenging, but I threw myself into it completely. My roommate, Jessica, became my first real friend since middle school. She didn't know my whole story at first, but when she did learn about it, she just hugged me and said, "Their loss, girl, their loss." Mom's Facebook page became my window into the life I'd left behind. There they were, the perfect family, smiling at Brandon's soccer tournaments, celebrating Emma's art show victories, taking vacation selfies at the beach. The captions always read like marketing copy, "So proud of our amazing kids," or "Nothing better than family time." I was never mentioned, not even once. It was like I'd never existed. Holidays were spent at Aunt Sarah's, cooking together and watching old movies. We created our own traditions, and they meant more to me than any forced family dinner ever had. Sometimes she'd catch me looking at Mom's social media posts and gently take my phone away. "Don't torture yourself," she'd say. "You're making your own story now." And I was. I graduated summa cum laude, with job offers already lined up thanks to my internships and academic performance. Jessica's father, Mr. Reynolds, ran a major marketing firm, and he'd noticed my work during a class project showcase. "We need sharp minds like yours," he said during my interview. "Your professors speak very highly of you." I started in the junior analyst position, but I wasn't content to stay there. I worked late, took on extra projects, and studied market trends in my free time. Within 5 years, I'd been promoted twice and had enough savings for a down payment on my own apartment. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I stood in my empty living room, keys in hand, and finally let myself cry. They were happy tears, tears of pride, of accomplishment, of knowing that I'd made it on my own terms. Then came the biggest surprise. Mr. Reynolds called me into his office one morning, about 7 years after I'd started at the company. "We're creating a new position," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Senior Director of Strategic Development. The board and I agree you're the right person for the job." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the salary figure. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, especially at my age. I never saw the point in broadcasting my life online. Sure, I had social media accounts, but I mostly used them to share occasional photos of sunsets or coffee shops. Aunt Sarah was the only one who knew about my promotions, my new apartment, or the sleek black Mercedes I'd bought myself as a reward for landing the director position. "You've earned every bit of it," she'd say proudly whenever I shared my achievements with her. Meanwhile, Brandon and Emma's social media feeds were like endless highlight reels of mediocrity. Brandon would pose next to his used Hyundai Elantra with captions like "Living the Dream," "Blessed," "Luxury Life," while Emma shared photos of herself at the local mall, tagging designer brands she clearly couldn't afford. One post particularly made me laugh, Brandon standing next to his car at some local car show, writing, "When hard work pays off. Success, entrepreneur." I was reading this while sitting in my Mercedes-AMG, worth more than his annual salary, but I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Then came the message that changed everything. It popped up on my Facebook one Tuesday morning. "Melanie, it's your mother. My 55th birthday is coming up next month, and I'm having a celebration at an expensive restaurant, Le Blanc. You've probably never heard of it. I expect you to attend. It's on the 15th, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't embarrass me. I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times. 12 years of silence, and this was how she reached out? No, how are you? No attempt to bridge the gap. Just a command to appear at her party, with that subtle dig about the restaurant's price point. I almost deleted the message right there. But something stopped me, curiosity, maybe, or the desire to see what would happen. I called Mr. Reynolds and requested a week off, then booked a flight to my hometown. That evening, over tea in her cozy kitchen, Aunt Sarah asked the question I'd been pondering myself: what are you planning to give her? I smiled, pulling out my phone to show her the confirmation email. A luxury vacation package to the Maldives. 2 weeks at a 5-star resort, first-class flights included. Worth about $15,000. Aunt Sarah's eyes widened. Melanie, that's too much. She doesn't deserve it. Oh, I know she doesn't, I laughed, taking a sip of tea. But can you imagine her face when she realizes what she's been missing all these years? The daughter she threw away turned out to be more successful than she could have imagined. I want to see her reaction when she realizes just how wrong she was about me. You're a little bit evil, Aunt Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. I love it. The evening of Mom's birthday, I slipped on my Chanel dress, elegant in its simplicity, with a price tag that could have bought 10 of the flashy outfits I spotted later that night. I deliberately took a taxi to the restaurant, amused by how this would play into their assumptions about my life. Le Blanc turned out to be exactly what I expected, the kind of place that impressed people who'd never eaten at a truly high-end restaurant. The kind of place that served frozen seafood but put gold leaf on the desserts. I'd had business dinners at places that made this look like a diner. The hostess led me to a private room where the party was already in full swing. Mom sat at the head of the table, wearing a sequin dress that sparkled under the chandelier. Richard was beside her, and Brandon and Emma flanked them like royal heirs. The rest of the seats were filled with relatives I hadn't seen in over a decade: Aunt Linda, who used to pinch my cheeks too hard, Cousin Rachel, who always bragged about her kids, and various other faces from my past. Mom's eyes barely flickered over me before her lip curled slightly. Oh, Melanie, you came. You could have dressed up a bit more for the occasion. I took my seat at the far end of the table, watching the show unfold. Aunt Linda gave Mom a scented candle set. It's from that nice shop at the mall, she explained proudly. Mom cooed over it like it was diamonds. Cousin Rachel presented a gift card to a local spa. For a day of pampering, she announced. More excited squeals from Mom. The gifts continued: a cookbook, a decorative vase, a basket of bath products. Mom treated each one like a precious treasure, making sure to emphasize how thoughtful and perfect each gift was. Then came Brandon and Emma's moment. They stood up together, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Mom, Brandon said, and it still felt wrong hearing him call her that, Emma and I pooled our money to get you something special. Emma pulled out her phone and showed a photo. It's a 65-inch smart TV. We already had it delivered and mounted in your living room. Mom burst into tears, pulling them both into a tight hug. My wonderful, generous children. I can't believe you did this. You must have saved for months. Finally, all eyes turned to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. Mom's expression darkened immediately. What's this supposed to be? Open it and see, I suggested quietly. But she didn't. Instead, her face turned red with anger. This is exactly what I expected from you, she spat. You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only nice thing you own. You take a taxi because you can't afford a car. And now you give me this tiny box? What could possibly be in here that's worth giving? A gift card to McDonald's? She threw the box back at me. It skidded across the table, leaving a scratch in the cheap veneer. Brandon and Emma snickered behind their hands. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. Richard just kept eating his dessert as if nothing was happening. I picked up the box calmly, brushing off the tablecloth crumbs that had stuck to its elegant wrapping. The room had gone quiet, waiting to see what I would do next. "You know what's funny, Mom?" I said, my voice steady. "In this little box is a receipt for a 2-week luxury vacation to the Maldives. First-class flights, 5-star resort, everything included. Worth $15,000. The color drained from her face. Emma dropped her fork with a clatter. That's impossible," Mom stammered. "You couldn't afford something like that. You're obviously lying." I couldn't help but laugh. "You'd know whether I could afford it or not if you'd shown any interest in my life these past 12 years. But let me catch you up, I'm a senior director at Reynolds Marketing Group. I own my apartment in the city. And that taxi you mocked? I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood." Brandon's mouth hung open. Emma had stopped giggling. "But since you're so convinced I'm a loser," I continued, tucking the box back into my purse, "and you clearly don't want anything from me, I won't spoil your birthday any further. Enjoy your TV, I hear the resolution is almost as good as the one in my home theater." I walked out with my head high, the click of my heels echoing in the sudden silence. The maitre d' called a taxi, and I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. She was waiting up for me, 2 cups of tea already steaming on the coffee table. I told her everything that had happened. "Some people never change," she sighed, shaking her head. "Your mother's always been more interested in appearances than reality." We were still talking when my phone started ringing. An unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Melanie, sweetheart." Mom's voice dripped with honey. "I do not know where she got my number. I've been thinking about what happened." "Have you?" I replied coolly. "Yes, and I realize now that I may have been hasty. If you're still willing to give me that gift, I'd love to accept it. We could use this as a fresh start. I want to be part of your life again. We're family." "No," I said, finally understanding something. "We're not family. We're just people who share DNA. And you didn't want to restore our relationship, you just want that vacation package." I hung up. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing after I left town. Mom called from different numbers, her cell, the house phone, even Richard's phone. When she realized I wouldn't pick up, the messages started flooding in. "Melanie, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I've been thinking about what you said about your job. Maybe you could help Brandon get started in marketing? He's very creative. Emma's been saying she'd love to intern at a big company like yours. It would look so good on her college applications. The house needs some repairs, and since you're doing so well." Each message was more transparent than the last. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just an endless stream of requests and hints about my money. It was like watching a desperate gambler trying to win back losses, except what Mom had lost wasn't money, it was her relationship with her daughter. I read each message with a strange detachment, like I was studying a case study for work. The tactics were almost impressive in their variety: guilt, "I'm your mother, how can you ignore me?" Flattery, "You've become such a successful woman." Manipulation, "Family should help family," and even threats, "I'll tell everyone how you abandoned your mother." Your mother's been calling me nonstop, Aunt Sarah told me over the phone a week after I'd returned home. She showed up at my house today, if you can believe it. Demanded I give her your address. "What did you tell her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I told her to get off my property before I called the police," Aunt Sarah chuckled. "You should have seen her face. She kept saying she had a right to know where her daughter lives." I reminded her that she gave up that right years ago. I could picture Mom standing on Aunt Sarah's porch, probably wearing one of her expensive outfits, trying to bully her way into getting what she wanted. It was the same pattern I'd watched my whole life, but now I could see it clearly for what it was. "She didn't take it well," Aunt Sarah continued. "Started ranting about how ungrateful we both were, how she'd sacrificed everything for you. The neighbors probably heard everything. When she finally realized I wasn't going to give in, she stormed off to her car. "But Melanie, be careful." She seemed desperate. "I already blocked her on everything," I assured Aunt Sarah. "Social media, phone, email, everything. And security at my office knows not to let her in if she shows up." After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, looking at everything I'd built for myself. The modern furniture I'd chosen, the art on the walls, the view of the city from my windows, all of it earned through my own hard work. I thought about Mom's messages, about her sudden interest in my life now that she knew I had money. In the end, it was almost funny. She'd thrown away a relationship with her daughter for the appearance of a perfect family, and now she was desperate to get back into my life for the appearance of success. But she'd taught me one valuable lesson: family isn't about legal documents. It's about love, support, and being there for each other through good times and bad. I had that with Aunt Sarah. The next morning, I called the travel agency and changed the name on the Maldives vacation package to Sarah Carter. When I told my aunt, she tried to refuse, but I insisted. "You deserve this more than she ever did," I said. "You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was." Aunt Sarah hugged me tight, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.